topic, obviously, what we want to talk about is human trafficking. And a lot of people have a couple misconceptions about what human trafficking actually is. Some people think it's something new. It's not. It's a new name for something that's been going on for a very long time. But once it's happened, once it's transacted and it started, then there's the cover-up, there's the hide it. And we have different forms of trafficking around the world. The one that you see glorified in the movies all the time is what I would call organized crime or pimp type operations. The one that's least known is one that we more recently discovered, and that's called family control. And that's exactly what it sounds like, family members selling family members. And unfortunately, it's one of the more difficult types to discover, because when you think about the movie Taken, when you think about anything that you've seen on TV, a drama about human trafficking, what's the central point of action? Somebody gets taken and hidden away and they're missing. In family controlled trafficking, nobody's missing. That little boy or that little girl, that young woman, that young man, they're exactly where they're supposed to be. They're at the softball game. They're at the pool, they're in school, they went to church. Nobody's missing, so what are you so worried about? Well, it's what happens when you're not around. It's what happens on that weekend where we went to visit a relative in Chicago, when in fact you were being sold in Chicago. It's what happened when you went to Omaha to see the zoo, but you weren't at the zoo. You were being sold again. And then when you come back, you don't tell anybody. And why wouldn't you tell anybody? Because the people in family control human trafficking are the people that you love. They are your brother, your sister, your mother, your father, your aunt, your uncle. And they've all told you that if you tell, then they're going to split us up. We're going to go to jail. You never see mom again, or dad, or whoever it is. And I can promise you that that's a tough wall to knock down, if you ever do. I would say it's one of the types of human trafficking that yields the lowest amount of disclosure, as opposed to a pimp situation or a gang situation or other. In the United States, it was 2012 when we woke up to the fact that, that's not prostitution, that's human trafficking. And we defined it in law as different than prostitution. The administration at the time made it one of the top 5 law enforcement priorities in the country. Top 5 law enforcement for all law enforcement throughout the United States. And that's where you saw legislation pass. That's where you saw funding happen for task force operations and organizations, for training for people who are going to care for these people, such as Wings of Refuge. And that was a good start. But like anything, there's a momentum that has to be maintained, or otherwise it falls off. And by that falling off, I mean that the biggest thing that we had to overcome, and we are still trying to overcome yet today, is getting the average citizen on the street to understand that this is here. This is not that third world country that I talked about before. This is not where it is ingrained in their culture. This is the United States, and this is Iowa. The main problem is when you hear the survivor story, it sounds unbelievable. Now, my background is law enforcement. And in law enforcement, and I'm old, so we were taught, get the facts. Just the facts. Don't confuse me with feelings and attitudes and emotions. Well, getting the facts from a survivor of human trafficking is much more difficult. The facts are there, the facts are real. I don't suppose anybody that sees this is going to think that somebody in Iowa would build a dungeon under their house and maintain a 17-year-old girl there and use her and then sell her to others in rural Iowa. Would you believe that somebody used their own child as bait to bring another child in that was ultimately trafficked? Does that happen in Iowa? Aren't we Iowa nice? We don't do that. Well, what you have is that naive belief, and it's the perfect cover for the trafficker, because they're going to tell and have told. Survivors will tell you, I will tell you. First thing you hear is they're not going to believe you if you tell somebody. And unfortunately, and I say this as a member of the thin blue line, law enforcement has been told but didn't believe it, which is exactly what the trafficker told them would happen. And so now our own ignorance has emboldened the trafficker and made them a stronger figure rather than a weaker one. Now, there is training. State of Iowa, its Department of Public Safety has the Office of Combat Human Trafficking. They also have a person there designated as the Human Trafficking Coordinator. And their job is to help coordinate a statewide response. It's not just the state patrol's job, it's not the DCI's job, it's all law enforcement's job, but they need a catch point. They need a central point to bring information in and to put information out, and that's what they do. And so they've had success. They've had success. But when you stop and you visit with people like you just met in this clip, you find there's a lot of them out there that tried it and didn't make it past the first step. So what I'm suggesting is the continuation and the intensifying of law enforcement training on human trafficking. I've had chiefs and sheriffs who never said to me, I don't want to do those kind of cases. I've had them say to me, I don't have the manpower. I don't have the money. I don't have the budget to do those things. And this is why we need to be re-examining this whole idea of regional task forces, blending the resources, and including advocates, including places like Wings of Refuge, so that when we are lucky enough to have a recovery, there's a place for them to go, where we know they'll be safe, where they know they'll be safe. At the local levels, you've got something like 900 law enforcement agencies in the state of Iowa. And that's from the one marshal in town to hundreds of thousands of people on your police department or law enforcement agency. How it works for them is basically when we find it, we address it. I've had some people say to me, well, take me out right now and show me a trafficking case. Well, how am I going to do that? My point is this. Is it possible that you as a patrol officer will see it? Yes. Question is, will you recognize it? Have you been trained to understand the story you're going to hear? But more likely, I believe that this is an intelligence-led policing operation. So what we need are analysts. Like in the Department of Public Safety, they have analysts. We need to increase that effort so that somebody's out there looking at what's in Iowa, because I'm not going to, but I could name sites that you could go to and find out who's for sale in your neighborhood. It's just that simple. We need law enforcement eyes on that to make it happen. And again, local officers, I believe, overall, are willing to do it, but sometimes they can't get past their own self-doubt or their own doubt of what they're hearing, because that just doesn't fit what happens in small town Iowa. Well, I think you just heard a story about that. So, I want to make a comment about, people ask this question a lot. What should I be looking for to see that this person is involved in human trafficking? Well, what are the signs? Well, there are, if you go online, there are lots of lists and lots of people who suggest lots of things. From a practical point of experience, I would tell you that they have no one certain behavior. They have no one certain look. They don't all respond the same way. It has a lot to do with how much trauma, how long they've been, what dangers they actually have faced, what they have witnessed. So to say that they're going to act a specific way, the last list I happened to look at would probably fit, but it would also fit most teenagers you know, because of the anxiety and the angst and the doubt and all these things. So what I'll tell you is this: if it doesn't look right, say something. Don't be the one that makes the decision that this is nothing. Turn it in. Make the call. I always want you to call 911 first, because they are there, they are on scene, and if it's something that needs to be addressed quickly, they can do it. But I also want you to call the national hotline, and you'll get that number later. That hotline is manned 24/7. And I know what that hotline does because when I was with the state, I was the person in Iowa that they called when they received a report. And it didn't matter whether it was 2 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday or the middle of Wednesday. It didn't matter. Because as soon as I was done with them, what that person's responsibility is to notify the jurisdiction that the report's coming from. And I did not wait until 8 o'clock in the morning or the next Monday for the chief to come in. Whoever the officer in charge was at 2 o'clock on Sunday morning is who I talked to about that case, because we never know how much time we're going to have. Some of these things don't require an immediate reaction. Some of them are a real intelligence operation, but some of them do. Because if you don't act now, they're going to be gone, or something worse is going to happen. So my first suggestion to you is simply this: if it doesn't look right, make the call. The worst that could happen is you'll be wrong. So what? There's a young woman who some time ago benefited from someone saying, hey, that doesn't look right. If you're familiar with the truck stop at the intersection of I-90 and I-35 up on the other side of the Minnesota border, there was a woman there. She's 19 years of age, from Iowa. And because a truck driver noticed something unusual and made a call, and law enforcement responded, she was recovered. The same thing happened to another girl from Iowa in Virginia. She was gone for 18 days. She was, by her own account, sold multiple times during that period of time. Ate or was given food, which consisted basically of dry cereal, about 5 times, and tortured in ways that I will not describe here. But another truck driver, and truck drivers tend to get a bad rap when you start talking about it. They're always kind of the bad guy. The truck drivers, to me, are an informed, and we have a group that we work with quite closely called Truckers Against Trafficking. And we have truck drivers all over the nation now who have been trained on human trafficking. And this truck driver had been. But he was standing there minding his own business when he watched the camper pull up, and the driver got out, but he got out and he locked the door with people still in it. And he said, Listen, he's just watching. He's just waiting for his truck to get done. And then the guy comes back out of the plaza, the driver, with another guy. And then they open the side door of the camper, of the RV. And there is another young woman being held up because she's been injured so badly that she can't stand on her own. He just sold her to him. That truck driver could have said, well, you know what, I don't know what's going on here. This is none of my business. I don't want to get sued. All the things that we all worry about and we all think about. But you know what? He chose to do something. And what he did was call the police. And as it happened, there were 2 state troopers in the area and they responded immediately, followed by 2 deputy sheriffs. That young girl was recovered and is back with her family. And those 2 individuals from Iowa are serving lengthy federal prison sentences now. So don't be afraid to say something. Make that call to 911, and I'm going to tell you right now, sometimes 911's not going to take much interest. We'll just be honest about it. A little hint on talking to 911. Don't tell them what you think is going on. Don't call and say, hey, you know what? I think there's human trafficking going on in Central Park. Because then all you're going to get is somebody asking, well, why do you think it's human trafficking? It's going to turn into this debate. What I'd like you to do is tell them what you see. Tell them what you see is happening. Well, he hit her and pushed her in a car. They got in a blue Chevy and she was fighting. It looked like she was fighting. That will get you a fast law enforcement response. There's not going to be a debate. So what I'm asking for you to do is help us get the officers there in as timely a way as possible. That time that you spent discussing what you know about human trafficking on the phone was wasted because it's not going to help anything. Call 911, tell them what you saw, let them take it from there. When you're done with that call, that's when I want you to call the national hotline. Because somebody from the state is going to call and follow up on that call. So not only do they have your call now, they've got a call from somebody in the Department of Public Safety saying, hey, we have this report. You need to take a look and tell us what you need. One of the other questions that is asked often is, how do you keep somebody out of this? How do you prevent it from happening to them? Well, as I've mentioned to you, there are at least 3 known forms of human trafficking: gang, family, and pimp. Now, of the 3, how do you suppose you can protect somebody in the family situation? Because, as I said, it can be relatives and family members that are actually doing this. The answer to this question is more simple than you might think. It's called education. Back in 2004, the state of Iowa created what is now known as the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. And we joined that task force in 2004, and I am still a member of that task force. And the first thing we did was go into schools and educate children, school children, at age-appropriate levels about what could possibly happen on the internet. What could possibly be the reason this person wants to know where you live? What could possibly be the reason that this person wants a picture of you? And to kind of let you know that they're not all really telling you what's true. We need to do the same thing, in my opinion, with human trafficking. It has got to be changed from what it looks like now, this exotic thing that only happens in the far-flung corners of the world. This is happening here. It's happening in Iowa. It's happening in Ames. It's happening in little towns throughout Iowa. You can pull up a map from the state of Iowa from, I'm blanking on who made it. I believe it was Department of Public Safety. But it shows you there isn't a quadrant of our state that doesn't have a history of cases in it. And I suspect that for one every case known, there are many more that are not. So raising our awareness is the best way to help prevent somebody from coming into this situation. And like I said, I'm old. I've been in the business of law enforcement for 40 years. In one shape or another. And I got into the task force about internet crimes against children in 2014. And that I started to get a sense. And I thought in my career I had seen the bottom 3 times. I thought on patrol, doesn't get any worse than this. The things you see as a patrol officer. Then I got on the task force, and it was like, impossible. There really aren't people like that. And then the Attorney General asked me to take on the Human Trafficking Task Force. And there again, for the 3rd time, I was proven wrong as far as seeing the bottom. That's why I want you to think about these survivors. Their experience is unlike, and I will say this every day, is unlike any other crime victim that I know. And I've done everything from parking tickets to homicides and everything in between. This person's experience is different. Their story is going to sound different. Their reaction is going to be different. Everything is going to be different about this one. But I've also seen the damage that human trafficking does. And places like Wings of Refuge, when we do get a survivor, and it's their job to help them on that trip, on that journey back to normal, some of them never make it. Some of them go back. In fact, the national average of running back to the street is 6 to 8 times, because this has been so, and I don't like the term brainwashing, but it fits here. It has been so totally ingrained that there's only one person in the world that you can believe, and that is your trafficker. And that's something I tell everybody. Think of somebody in your life who's never told you a lie. Well, mom and dad is out because there's the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus. Sorry if the young kids are in the audience. Who in your life hasn't told you some kind of a falsehood? Now ask a survivor if their trafficker ever told them a lie other than what it was to get them in the first place. Because every time they told you you'd get beat, you got beat. Every time you got starved, you got starved. They don't lie. And that is the power, and that is the control that they have over these people. So imagine yourself in the worst of situations that you've ever seen in your life, and you're not even close. So what keeps me going is that. I think of 2 particular cases. The first survivor that I ever met, and a survivor who brought their story to me 30 years after the fact. And it was a story, like I tell you, it sounds crazy. That's the word, crazy. The reason she got to me was that other agents had already, from other agencies, had already talked to her, and then finally they knew that I'm a soft touch. And they said, Mike, try to get her off her back. So I listened to her. We talked for 5 hours. And I shouldn't say we talked, she talked for 5 hours. I asked her one question at the beginning, and I answered one question at the end. And her physical behavior was stunning, because at the beginning she was drilling me. She was eyes on fire, trying to burn through you. And when she saw I wasn't going to say, that didn't happen, your attention, everything she'd been told before. Then she started to soften, and pretty soon her head is down and her tears are falling on the floor. And at the very end, she said, I have one question for you. And she asked me. And the question was, do you think I'm crazy? And I said, no, I think you're hurt. So that's what keeps me going. There are a lot of hurt people out there that I think we can do better for. I think we want to do better for. And believe me, I'm not throwing rocks at anybody. Everybody's doing the best with what they got. That's the equation that has to change. They need more.